Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb shit businesses do. We ask the big juicy questions, why, what were they thinking, and then we chase down the answers so you lazy sods don't have to. I'm Matt Anderson, a business designer, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a corporate plumber.
And I'm Rob. I've been painfully curious about people for the last 28 years. It's not getting any easier or any less fun.
So today we're going to dive into a topic we're both actually super keen to explore. It's one that is very close to our hearts and hopefully to anyone who's actually taken on a leadership gig. It's all about that first leadership role, the dream, the nightmare, and everything in between. So Rob, I know this is going to be a stretch for you, but can you remember back some many years ago to your first people leadership role? Can you tell me about it?
My very first people leadership gig, 1996, I think. 1996. So quite some time ago at this point. I had just sort of found a niche where learning and development had become my thing. I was a corporate trainer for the first time. And my boss said, how about you run the team? And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, how hard can that be? And very is the answer to that. So I was of the opinion, Matt, that if as a lot of businesses are, that if you're pretty good as a technical specialist, if you have some sort of competence in the role that you do, whatever that is, surely you're going to be fantastic at leading a bunch of people who would respect your competence in that technical field, whatever it is. But that was the first time in my career that I found out that what got you here won't get you there.
No, I think that the technical jump is something that I don't think quite gets appreciated. At least it wasn't for me as well. I mean, I was working for Video Easy, which was the Blockbuster equivalent in New Zealand at the time. And I was absolutely legendary in my own mind at my ability to stack those cassettes or videotapes that were going through on the walls in record time. Like I knew the fastest path. I was slightly OCD, I think, at that point in time, early on in the career, and highly competitive. So it's like, can I stack shelves faster than anybody else? Can I make sure customers are absolutely thrilled to hang out with us at this? Do I know what to recommend? You better believe it. The Shawshank Redemption, by the way, was always my fallback go-to video to recommend back then. Because no one had heard of it, and it was brilliant. But for some reason, I think it was desperation or perhaps the high turnover of staff that they said, Matt, we'd love you to kind of be on the shift lead that's going on at the, for us. And I went, oh, great, awesome! I'm gonna nail this. This is going to be an adventure. The problem was, right, I really was so ill prepared to know what to do, because I jumped straight into thinking leadership was all about the task and not about the people. And that was one of the many, many stuff ups that I was about to make as I embarked on my leadership career. So I was great at the command and control of this needs to go here, need to have the time, clean up over there. There was zero sort of two-way interaction whatsoever that was happening.
What do you think made a good leader back then, Matt?
Well, that was the kind of thing that when I was looking around for who were the kind of leaders that would inspire me, you had either your parents at the time, or you'd have teachers early on in space, perhaps uni lecturers, or your boss at the time. So in this case, I felt I had slim pickings that were going. I looked around and I wasn't impressed by any of those folks. Mum doesn't listen to this podcast, I hope, but sisters, if you're listening, do not tell Mum that. And anyway, for me, I turned to the best documentary source ever, and that was TV, Star Trek, Captain Kirk. He was absolutely my go-to role model. I mean, you think about it, he always knew what to do. It didn't matter if he was on a hostile planet or the ship was ready to blow up at that point, and he had the answer. He was a brilliant leader because he had minions always wearing the red shirts, and he was happy to sacrifice them instantly to keep the mission on course. So he was religiously task-orientated. Command and control, fire first, ask questions way later in the piece. And he didn't believe there wasn't a problem that he couldn't solve. So his ego was the size of a planet. So naturally, I thought, brilliant, that is so me. I've got this. again, early in career, many mistakes were made. First one was choosing a lousy role model. What about for you? What about for you there, Rob?
I was thinking about this, Matt, when we decided we were going to work this topic for this podcast, and I remember thinking, or I remembered back to that time and thinking how lucky I was. I didn't see it at the time, but in hindsight, going back and thinking how lucky I was. My experience with leadership prior to corporate, like you said, came from a few good teachers that I had, and maybe my mum and dad. And I remembered my old scout leader, Derek, and I grew up in a reasonably rough part of Dublin in a reasonably rough time. So a lot of the kids that were in the scouts with me were kind of tough kids. And Derek ran it like it was the special forces of scout troops. It was all command and control. He was teaching you to be a proper little soldier. It was,
Yeah.
It would be terrifying to parents now, but we loved it at the time. But that was the only real experience I had with leadership. And then I went into the corporate world, and I was blessed to be put under the tutelage of Nisha Blake. She was at the time, Nisha Hartigan, she is now. And Nisha was the first in a very, very long line of very strong female leaders that I was lucky enough to work under. And I remember thinking, Nisha back then was not very different to some very progressive leaders now. In fact, she was as good, if not better, than most of them. At a time where that sort of thing was less valued. So I remember Nisha being an amazing role model, but then I remember her having to struggle to deal with an awful lot more of that sort of command and control traditional leadership that was still in place. She was seen as fun and a little crazy, and all of these things that we use to describe the people that we gravitate towards. But she was rare in that organization at that time. She's still rare as a human being, but she was rare in that organization. Whereas now I think we would be far more accepting of people that have that fun side, that quirky side, that slightly crazy side, who can also push us into learning wonderful things, which is what Nisha did for me. She was awesome then, but she was sort of a lone voice in the wilderness at that organization, or at least more so than you would see these days.
But I think on that note is you're going to meet different role models or meet different types of leaders as you go through your career, and you go, okay, I so would love to have more of those traits, more of that ability, more of that presence that they've got. Or quite the opposite. So, hey, that's so not the leadership style that resonates for me. And I think even when you have crappy role models that are going through, you can question yourself saying, okay, that's how I feel. That's the knock-on effect of being led by that type of leader. Is that really how I want others to feel in that environment? So I think you can learn from both crappy role models as well as the fantastic ones. And you touched on a topic there, Rob, where you said at the time you didn't quite perhaps appreciate or notice it as much. And I think that's really annoying, because that happened to me as well. Gary Hoddenot, that when I worked for Fonterra, I thought he was a lousy leader. That was my first impression that was going through, because he would just walk the floors and he would chat to people and he would hang out with them and he would get to know them. And I thought, focus on task, right? Like he's really, I was the dumbest idiot at that point in time for not realizing he was focusing very much on building relationships, on understanding him, building trust at that point in time. I didn't realize that at the time, and I really regret that. So thanks, Gary, for helping me understand the value of relationships and how that plays. But in terms of, if you think back into those 1990s there, Rob, can you help sort of the listeners who perhaps haven't lived through that fabulous decade of decadence that's gone in there, as to what was it like to lead back then?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Matt. I mean, I'm getting old enough now that when people say the 1990s, I'm like, oh, wasn't that a little over 10 years ago? I heard somebody refer to it as the turn of the last century yesterday, which made me feel very, very old indeed. I mean, there are some things that have changed and some things that haven't since the 90s from what I can
Yep.
see. I think there's a slight difference in style.
Yep.
We've become more interested in people. We've become more interested in things like authentic leadership, which we've spoken about before. There tended to be in the 90s a bit more of the, I'm going to say jump, and I will expect you to say how high immediately.
Yep.
There was a little bit more of that, just do as I say and everything will be fine. There were certainly bosses and leaders that had an interest in your well-being, but
Yep.
they were fewer and further between, I think would be fair to say. There was a difference in the communications
Yep.
that went out from the organization. There was very little consultation with the folks at the coalface. It was like, here's how it's going to be. Now off you go and get shit done. We were less interested, I think. Well, certainly where I was growing up, we were less interested in whether the organization was aligned to our values or anything like that. We got a paycheck and we were delighted with it. Ireland at the time was coming out of a pretty nasty period of massive unemployment. So the government put in these tax benefits that made a whole heap of large multinationals come into the organization, including a large American company which I worked for. Yep. But we were just delighted to have a job. Yep. If there were any moments of joy in there, well, that was just a bonus. So there was a lot of that going on. I think the decision making was longer term, if that makes sense.
Can you tell me a bit more about that, Rob? Because like I often hear this question all about the pace that was going back. Today it's absolutely switched on. It's in the moment. It's holy cow. You guys were in the dark ages, even though it was 30 years ago.
Yeah, and in a way that is the dark ages with the speed that business is moving at these days. And I think that might actually be one of the problems. We don't see long-term decision making or long-term planning and decisions in line with that long-term planning as much as we used to. And this is one of the things that does actually, I've got a bit of feedback saying I shouldn't describe myself as an old fossil, but it's one of the things that does make me feel like an old fossil is that there's a speed to decision making that's very, very short term. You see wonderful TV shows get cancelled after their first season because they're not bringing in the viewership that you expect them to. And when somebody takes a punt on one of those shows and goes, we'll just go a second season, they're often really successful. You see politicians making decisions about what's going to get them in next time rather than what's actually going to benefit their country in 10 or 20 years. I mean, can you imagine somebody like John F. Kennedy today going, we choose to go to the moon by the end of this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard? If somebody said that now, that we'd all be like, well, he's not getting in next time. And I think that's the way it is in business too, is that the decisions are made about how are we going to deliver the value that the shareholders expect by the end of this financial year. Whereas I remember back then, we had a 5-year plan for world domination, and we were making decisions around the 5-year plan for world domination.
But were those 5-year plans delusional? Like, were they the ones where it's like, okay?
No, I really don't think they were. I mean, there were elements of them that were, like, we assumed that a business model that worked beautifully in America would work just as well in Europe and Australia and places like that, and we had to make some tweaks to it. But you had people that were dedicated to that organization. You had people that had long-term tenure in senior leadership gigs. Back then, the average tenure of a CEO was about 7 to 8 years, whereas now it's 2, right? Back then, a culture change window was 2 years. Now it's 6 months. So the pace is getting faster, but I think it's leading us to poorer decision making in a lot of cases, simply because we don't have our eyes on those long term goals. Is that something you've experienced, or have you seen something different?
Well, when I looked at the strategies that were designed back then, one of the challenges is you were making assumptions that had to have a long window on them.
Hmm.
And a lot of the time they required significant pivots or change, or let's cover my ass and pretend like nothing ever went wrong here. This is all perfect. And so the thing is, we didn't have as much data points coming in us at real time at that.
Hmm.
Email was relatively new. The web was just in its infancy. Mobile phones were absolute bricks and a whole novelty. You used to laugh at the guys walking down the streets, and because only a few people would have it and talking. Thought, what an idiot. I think the challenge for leaders back then was around the decision making would happen in an ivory tower predominantly. It would
Yes.
not be spread out amongst the team. There was no concept of co-design. The thought of transparently communicating to the front line of, I don't have all the answers, I don't know, I need your help, would have just sent shivers down the spines of the CEOs and execs at that time. It was very much, I know, I'm in control, this is how it's going to be, I have the answers, or at least that's the illusion they wanted to share and present out, which was often not correct or not the right thing. And so for me, when I reflect back and think, was I any less stressed back then versus today? Was it any less fast back then? You still had deadlines that you needed to ably hit. You still had the mad hours you needed to be able to put in to hit those unachievable deadlines. So I think it's just a different type of pressure. It was a different type of time. I don't think it's any harder now or then than it was when it came to the environment and what it was. I think that kind of sends me a signal that as leaders, or as humans, we adapt to the environment that we're in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The adaptation. I mean, that's the old Darwin quote. Everybody thinks it's only the strong survive, but it was neither the strongest nor the most intelligent, but the most adaptable that survive. And that's one of the reasons humans have done as well as they have. But the thing that interests me about it, you mentioned email and the web being in its infancy and so on. All of these wonderful tools, when they came in, I mean, I remember being promised that things like email and Outlook calendars and the web, they were just going to make life so much easier for us. We'd be able to get our working week done in 20 hours easy, because now we wouldn't have to go looking for all that information. It'd all be on the web for us. And I think one of the things that we've adapted to is, okay, a lot of this technology gives us efficiencies, which means we can cram more into our 60 to 80 hour week. I don't think tech helps all that much at all.
Do you think we could have been better prepared for leaders? Like, do you think we can really prepare leaderships not to go through this baptism of fire, though?
No. There's a. It's like asking somebody, could you learn to drive a car from a book? Yeah, you can probably learn the theory of it, but you're not going to get it unless you have the practice. And I think that's the mistake an awful lot of leaders make, is they read a couple of good books, and we know a few of them, and then they go, cool, I'll just apply this in my day job and everything will be fine. And then we add the weirdness of human interactions in there, and it all goes to hell in a handbasket. So there's the academic learning, there's the theoretical learning of becoming a leader, which you can do at any time. Yeah, but once you first get thrown into that deep end, time to swim, and expect to take on a lungful of water or two along the way, because it and particularly that step, that first leadership step, it's an absolute doozy. It's the biggest step you'll ever take in your corporate career. And the only way for you to get good at it is to have the experience. Now, you can make that experience less painful by paying attention to the theoretical learning, by paying attention to the mentors, the ones who teach you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. By we've spoke about intentional design before, that we intentionally design the kind of leader that we want to be, rather than just letting it happen organically, which is what I did. I was just like, well,
Yep.
I kind of like that, and I kind of like that. And it's only years later that I go, oh, I'm actually a little piece of Nisha, and a little piece of Angela, and a little piece of Mark, you know,
Yeah.
and I've just co-opted that along the way.
But I think you've touched on an important one is you need exposure, though, to different environments and to different leaders to kind of figure that out, right? So I'm always concerned when you see individuals that have been in certain industries or certain environments, and that's all they know, because then their ability to think laterally or think of alternative ways to handle different situations can be quite narrow. That said, there are organizations that are very conscious of that, and do want to retain talent. So they look very much around how do they move leaders across different teams, across different
Sure.
roles, across completely different disciplines. So they are trying to round them out and give them as much scope. They do send them external networks and help them to build those, so that again they're not blinkered in to the one culture or the one way of doing things. But that kind of brings me to the topic, Rob, very much around what do you hear around the traps of what type of leaders are we after today?
Yeah, so we want a leader who is highly competent, has 18 years experience, but is expecting a salary like they're fresh out of uni. No, it's the thing that gets me about it here, Matt, is the last topic did kind of bring us on to this.
Yeah.
We don't give leaders the time that they need to learn,
Yeah.
and to me that's huge. I was looking back on my career, I was really lucky, really lucky.
Yeah.
I had some phenomenal bosses, all of whom had something to teach me, and
Yep.
all of whom gave me the time to learn it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it was all sweetness and light. There were times that I was thrown in the deep end and expected to swim.
Yep.
There were times that I drowned and got pulled out by one of those bosses, and they went, well, what have we learned? But I was given that time, and not just the time, but active assistance in
Yep.
learning the new thing that I needed to learn.
Mm.
When I had been learning an organizational development manager for a long time, I
Yep.
remember my boss Angela. I've mentioned her before, and she's my role model when it comes to kick-ass leadership.
Yep.
And she said, I think you've probably got as far with this L&OD thing as you're going to get. So how about we start prepping you to take over my gig, to be a HR director, manager of culture and people. And I said, sure, let's give it a shot. And she goes, well, let's get into talent management first, because you can do that off the back of your L&OD experience, and that should be a pretty easy transition. And then it was learn more about recruitment, and then it was learn more about high potential development, and learn more about remuneration. And then she went, and now you've got to help me to rewrite all of the policies and procedures in the organization, because if you're going to do the fun stuff, you're going to do the boring stuff as well. So I rewrote 42 policies and procedures for the organization. The last one I did was the drugs and alcohol policy. And at that point, I figured that Angela wasn't reading them anymore. So I sent her one that said, for drugs, see Angela. For alcohol, see Rob. And she sent it to the CEO. So we had a bit of fun with that. But the point was, she was going, here's some stuff that you can learn quickly off the base of the experience that you've got. Here's some new stuff that's going to be trickier for you to adapt to. And here's the really boring stuff that nobody likes, but you've got to do anyway. But here's the time you need to do that. I know you can do the learning and OD stuff with your eyes closed now. So let's learn this stuff along the way. And that's what got me my first gig as an exec manager of culture and people, was Angela's investment. So I think that's the big deal, is that if people have an ambition, and you have the ability to stretch them in a supported way, but you give them the time to do that learning, they'll blow your mind every time.
But That's when you have a supportive leader or supportive
Oh yeah.
manager, right? When we were thinking about doing this podcast and saying, okay, what kind of leaders are we looking to? I wanted to sort of look beyond my own sort of exposure and say, okay, what is modern day businesses trying to ask? And so I did a Google search. I tried to look at Seek, LinkedIn. I chatted to some folks as part of it to get a real feel for it. And I've come back terrified having read it all because the list is extraordinarily long that's going through. I mean, we want these folks to be absolutely empathetic at this point. We want them to have to adapt to a moment's crisis. We want them to understand the latest technology and how can we apply it or how do we make the most of it. Oh, we want them to be purpose-led with an ethical mindset that's coming from it. And by the way, you've got to have all the hybrid skills. Who the hell has hybrid skills? It's only a couple of years old for us. We're still getting to grips at this point in time what that even means. So I'm seeing huge, long lists of like unstoppable unicorns that we're trying to ask for right up front before they've even walked in the door. That makes me a little bit concerned that we've actually been quite unrealistic of what we're expecting or asking for of these individuals. What's your take, Rob, when you're seeing these long list of requirements coming of our expectations of leaders?
If you want the unicorn, they're there. There's a few of them, right? They're rare. You're going to pay for them, and best of luck keeping them happy in your organization. They're I'm not going to say difficult people to deal with. But in the same way that your expectations of them are high, their expectations of you are going to be monstrous too. Yeah. That's why they command the big salary. That's why they have the huge amounts of experience. Yeah. But we spoke in a previous podcast about the importance of developing your own people internally rather than going externally to look for these folks. And I really think that's the way we deal with this. Take the people that you have on the inside and shape them into the human beings that you need them to be, rather than going out and trying to find perfection on the outside. Because let's be honest about it, right? You've seen job ads like that. I've applied for job ads like that. And I didn't have 40, 50% of what they were looking for. But I was like, you know what? I'll get a foot in the door at the interview, and then I'll let the Irish charm work its magic, and we'll see what happens. Which means you end up in an organization where they're going, oh, this guy, Rob, we've just hired, he's amazing. And you're like, I'm so faking it here. Hopefully, I'll be able to fake it long enough that I can actually learn it, but that's it. I remember Richard Branson saying, if you see a job you love, apply for it, get it, and then work out how to do it. And I remember going, yeah, that's kind of cool. So when you're going out looking for these unicorns, you're not getting them. You're getting people that can play the part of a unicorn reasonably well. But they're learning on the fly like anybody else is. Your organization is unique. It's different to everything else that's out there. It's got its own cultural weirdnesses. It's got its own way of working, that sort of stuff. Even if you get a unicorn, they're going to have to adapt to it. So why not get somebody who already knows that stuff to adapt to it? That would be my take on it. Is that in line with your thinking, Matt, or are we barking up two different trees here?
Well, I think we are in agreement because, which is very unfortunate. We want to bring the spice that's in there. When do the Kiwis and the Irish ever agree on anything? To me, perhaps when we're playing Australian rugby, but I think when it comes to the leadership world that we have today and being able to find talent, what I'm hearing is I can't secure the talent I need, or they're not applying, but I'm despite them getting the many applications that are coming through. That's indicating you're going to have to build your talent, and yes, that'll take time. And that's the fear factor. It comes back to that pace, the immediate results. I need them now. The reality is it's hard to find good leaders because we're trying to rush them, I think, so fast through the ladder that's going through quickly that you end up finding leaders who may be brilliant at technology or brilliant at technical, great at the empathy, but they're missing the commercial chops. We're not really rounding out our leaders, I think, as much as we ought to or should to.
Yeah.
We're just burning them out in the very skill set that we were excited that they had,
They
and not
had.
actually developing or growing them in the areas that they need and also the company needs ultimately at that point. So
Mm.
I do worry that the leadership development programs are not setting our leaders up to succeed. I think just to put a post out this morning, which was talking about only 36% of leaders actually of HR leaders believe the development programs are setting their leaders up to succeed. I mean, holy cow! So 7 out
Yeah.
of 10 of them are screwed at that point in time. Are going to be in a world of pain and trouble. And I don't think that's just the training. I think it's actually the environment of, yes, you may have gone to the one day's entertainment, but there's no chance to embed it. There's no feedback loops that are happening. So I do worry that for new leaders that are coming into today's world, they are coming to a fast, frantic, chaotic environment. And I don't think we're doing the right thing by setting them up to succeed in many organizations. So kind of brings us to the next topic here, Rob, where I'm like, what could we do to support new leaders today that are coming into an organization? What are the pragmatic things that organizations can do to set them up to succeed?
Yeah. So you mentioned the leadership training, and that's a topic that's close to my heart. So I mean, that's how I make my living most of the time. But even at that, there are some things that are frustrating in that, like you said, there are some organizations that treat it like a day's entertainment so that we can tick a box and that's it, your leadership training's done. But on the flip side of that, I've seen organizations that have done it really well, that I've worked with, that have worked really well on it. I've mentioned one of them before. I've at least mentioned the program before. But you know, I've been working with Carnival Cruises on and off for 7 or 8 years now. We both know Peter Little, who's the president there, and Carnival do an emerging leader program where they identify people that have the potential to be leaders, and then I get to spend 5 sessions with them, usually over 10 months. So they've got plenty of time in between to reflect on those skills and develop them and so on. And in that, we talk about the values that you aspire to. We talk about setting objectives, delivering feedback, doing coaching, managing poor performance, motivating teams, stuff like that. And it sets them up to hit the ground running when they are either just in their first leadership position or they're about to take on their first leadership position. It gives them a little bit more confidence. The feedback that I get from that program is golden because they're scared. They're terrified. I've been identified as a potential new leader. Uh-oh. You know, I was really happy over here doing my spreadsheets, and now but the feedback I get is that you just the program made it a little bit easier to hit the ground running. And that's what you're looking for in any time that you're going through a significant change like that. All you really want is the skills to give yourself a little bit more confidence. Yeah. You've got that little bit more confidence. You're not spending your time focusing on pushing down the panic. You're spending your time going, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I've got it. I'm okay. On top of the training, we offer them some coaching so that we can talk about their individual needs as well. And I basically give all of the participants my phone number and go, hey, call me whenever. No charge to you or Carnival or anybody else. Just give me a call. And I get calls from time to time where somebody's like, so this just happened. And I'm like, yeah. And nothing I could have said would have prepared you for that. So let's talk about it. So I think that's really, really important to have a training program that sets your leaders up for success in the softer stuff. They know the technical stuff. Don't worry too much about that. Yeah. Or certainly it's much easier to lead. But in the softer stuff, give them the confidence they need to deal with that change. Make sure they have a coaching opportunity as well so that they can talk about their individual needs and allow them to have the confidence to not be dealing with the panic all the time. That's what I've seen work really, really well in that regard. What about you? Have you seen other things?
Well, I think it's funny you use the word softer, and I think that's the vernacular we all try and talk about.
Yeah,
But it's the scariest shit stuff that you have no idea how you're going to actually solve. And so it's when conflict arises. It's when there's your first complaints that are coming through from staff, when you've got mutinies that are bubbling up in the
yeah,
surface, when you suddenly got your budget's been axed, but you really care about your team, you're trying to find a way to steer through this, and how do you have these conversations? It's
yeah,
all the uncomfortable stuff that for some reason never seems to be in the books. It never seems to quite be what you thought when you were signing. Yes, I'm so excited to be a leader at that
yeah.
point in time. It's the uncomfortable stuff. So I love your take on talking about it. It helps build that confidence and helps sort of push down the focus that goes down on the fear factor. But
Mm.
the role you also talked about, players, is the check-in, like the ability,
Yeah,
I think, for the organization to say, how are we going to help these new leaders have a path to be able to check in? I'm doing okay with somebody they absolutely trust, but can also give them a nudge in the right area. I've been lucky with a number of the bosses that I've worked with that they've created a really safe environment for me to be able to have. I'm sucking at this. Here's what's going down, right? And I'm not worried. Are they going to be writing this quietly up in my performance review diary for the end of the year? They're generally caring about me to saying, okay, Matt's struggling. So what can I do to support him in this
yeah,
environment? And that safe environment to be able to have those check-ins and to kind of figure out, am I the only idiot that's ever stuffed this up, right? Because you do feel very vulnerable, very isolated in that moment, because it's like, okay, how much do I share that with the team or not? So even discovering vulnerability boundaries and
yeah.
where do you play that? That's all completely new to you as a leader. I think the fact that you do, for me, I'd encourage organizations, how are you building the support networks for these individuals to be able to grow, to learn, to bounce ideas off, to ask questions, because you're going to have your biases of where you're stronger as a leader. So if they're expecting you to be empathetic and that's your go-to, you've got that, but you have no technical nous or technology nous, or commercials all new, or your communication in front of a big audience is a terrifying prospect. You want them to be able to tap into other people in the organization that have those strengths and have those capabilities. But the key thing is about expectation setting. As a new
Mm.
leader, you'll have expectations on yourself. You
Yeah,
also look around others and kind of go, okay, they're helping me sort of calibrate what expectation I should be aiming for. Like these idiots around me, for leaders, I could do it so much better, versus, oh my God, will I ever be able to fill those shoes? You'll have different views on the expectations on yourself. And often you can be the toughest critic. But the other
no
one is
doubt.
getting clear with your boss, your leader at that point in time. What are their expectations? And then also your team. What do they expect of you, and what do you expect of them? And that can be a really delicate conversation to have for the very first time. So you think about, sit down, you're meeting your team, you're looking around that table. Hi, I expect you to be here at 9 o'clock every morning and to stay for, like, do you just list out those commands? I mean, what expectation setting environment have you seen work really well when a new leader is coming into that role?
Yeah, so when a new leader's coming into a role, or even an experienced leader coming into a new team, like when
Mm.
there's some sort of newness between you both,
Yep.
I think the important thing is that the important thing to remember is that, as a leader, your team expect you to set expectations with them, right? That's one of their expectations. Right? What they don't expect is for you to ask them what their expectations are of you.
Yeah.
And I know we've spoken about this before in a previous podcast, but you can learn quite a lot from that when you go, hey, so my expectations of you. And when I'm talking through those, it won't be that you show up at 9 and that you leave at 5,
Yep.
or whatever. It'll be softer stuff. It'll be, don't be evil,
Yep.
don't mess up your customer. It'll be things like that, little guide rails that you can work between. But then when you go, and what are your expectations of me, they go, hold up, we're allowed to have expectations of you. And then very quickly, or at least the few times that I've run it, very quickly they go, right, well, if I'm allowed to have expectations, this is happening. And
Yep.
you get a list of stuff. And most of it is entirely normal, but it gives you a pointer as to what's going well with this team, what's not going so well with this team, where you need to focus your efforts. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. The rest of the expectations you can manage by exception. When somebody comes in at 7 and leaves at 3,
Yeah.
if all you're interested in is them getting their work done and they do it in
Yeah.
that time, that's cool. But if they miss the really important meeting that they were signed in for at 4 o'clock,
Yeah.
well, then maybe we need to have a chat. But you can manage that kind of stuff by exception. I think again, it's the softer, the more uncomfortable stuff that you want to have expectations about up front.
I think the other thing for me around that organizations can do, and is a really important one, if they are serious about well-being, right, they need to monitor pretty much the new leader that's taking into the role. Because one of the observations I have, if a new leader comes in, they will immediately start to cook the hours, right? They'll immediately start to throw themselves into the job that comes as part of it. They'll work through lunches. The exercise routines start to fall off at that point. And so right from the very first gig, like, it's like, hold on, you believe your whole role model in this environment is a pressure cooker environment. Now, I'm not saying leadership's not hard. I'm not saying it doesn't take additional hours, but those around them, if the organization wants this leader to grow and be successful, they need to be able to call time and say, hey, I'm just noticing at this point in time, you skipped lunch almost every day this week, right? And by the afternoon, I can see you're really struggling. In fact, at the conference we were just at, Rob, with the ophthalmologist running the workshops down there, I got to see Alex look after one of her team members who was working all the way through lunch, and she was getting that team member was doing an amazing job. She was getting a whole lot of really positive feedback that was coming from the ophthalmologist, the fellows that were there. So she was sticking around because she wanted them to be set up to succeed. But it's like Alex had to say, like, hold on, I'm taking you for lunch now at this point in time, like the intervention kind of piece, and that's okay, right? Like, to me, I think that caring for your people and actually saying it's okay to actually be human in this conversation, to care about your well-being, to care about yourself, it's a really important lesson to learn really early in the piece. What I worry, though, is when we look at how we celebrate or recognize leaders in this environment, what signals are you sending that's either going to reinforce bad behaviors, right, or celebrate them? What have you seen work or not work around celebration of wins or recognizing wins in leadership?
So, that's a really interesting one, and to be honest, I haven't thought about this anywhere near the level I should, but I know an interesting question when I see one. That to me is very interesting, simply because I'm quite aware of the fact that if I go and praise somebody publicly, let's say, for putting in a huge amount of work on this project and getting it across the line, what they hear is huge amount of work. That's what I should be doing around here. I should be doing a huge amount of work. And that's, it's not what we should be fostering as leaders. Often when we are celebrating somebody's success, we're talking about the massive amount of effort that they put in, the long hours that they did, the sacrifices that they made, and so on. And then that other people hear that and go, all right, that's what I've got to do to succeed around here. That's what your real expectations of me are. And it shouldn't be. What the answer to that is, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, I'm not sure. I'm already having a visceral reaction to praising somebody for just doing their day job. But I shouldn't, right? Because that's exactly what they're paid to do. That's exactly why they joined our organization. So they should be congratulated for doing that. But I think that we put too much store in effort and time and sacrifice. And what we should instead, I guess, be celebrating is creativity, is building an environment where that kind of effort doesn't burn people out. That's the sort of stuff that perhaps we should be celebrating. Have you thought more on this than I obviously have?
No, Rob, I really haven't at this point. That's why I asked the question at this point. I think the topic for me is a sensitive one because I do get frustrated where I feel we're handing out gold stars for the least and I do default around effort. But for me, what's behind that is I'm trying to look at the outcomes that they are working to achieving, and it's more if it's kind of like that indication. Are they giving a damn about this or
Yeah,
not? Right. So it's
yeah,
not. I'm not looking at you burned all the hours and you spent. I'm like, are you giving a damn about the outcome, and are you working
sure.
towards it? Right.
Yeah.
And I struggle on this one where it's like I know that does take grit because there will be failures and stuff ups along the way in pursuit of that outcome. But when you kind of sit back and say, look, yeah, I'll get to it. That's kind of the will factor, or it's like it's not on the same priority. I'm like, okay, what do I need to learn or relearn about how I'm setting expectations with that individual? Because we have a very
Yeah.
different belief around getting to the outcome and what that takes. I do think when you, though, reward people for behaviors that they got to the outcome by burning everybody else, not themselves, around it, that's when I worry. I see that a lot in business. Really, they're getting promoted at the cost of other people's sacrifice.
Yeah.
And staff see that and they talk about it and say, hold on, if to be a leader, I've got to be a dick, right? I've got to be an absolute prick in this environment. That's what it's going to take. And so you get bubbling to the surface a whole bunch of pricks, and then you wonder why there's no trust at all amongst the executive leadership team. That I think needs to change. And that's a big part of why corporate therapy has been motivated for me. But if we flip that to say, okay, that's what the organization can do in this environment, and we now start to focus on the individual and what their playbook would look like for brand new leaders fresh off the boat that's going to, what would that look like for you? What encouragement or advice would you give new leaders just starting out?
The first one that comes to mind is it's sort of off the back of what I said earlier about the training program, a good training program allowing you to feel a little more confident, to not have to push the panic down all the time. Yeah. There's a saying that I like, a trait that I like, which is to be calm in the chaos. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, if you can be calm in the chaos,
Yeah.
what that tells me is that you've got the level of confidence that you need to manage this. You may be panicking on the inside, but if you can portray a little bit of calm in the chaos, if you can be comfortable with the uncomfortable, that to me is often a sign of this new leader is going on to being a future CEO or a future Simon Sinek or whatever, somebody who's actually going to make a difference to people's lives. If they can stay calm in the chaos, that's a big deal.
But on that, Rob, I mean, think about your first leadership role. Just about every leadership challenge you hit was brand new to you, right? It was an unknown quantity. It was like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. So their ability to be calm in that space, it's very easy to say. It's bloody hard to do.
Difficult to do.
Yeah. What advice would you give to help them to stay, okay, shit's going on here, I gotta stay calm, right? What advice would you be giving them?
So since Socrates was a boy, we've been hearing know thyself, right? But that's important. I think one of the reasons people panic in leadership roles as much as they do is they don't take the time to go, what am I comfortable with? What am I not comfortable with? Where are my strengths? Where are the areas that I have an improvement opportunity? I don't really believe in strengths and weaknesses. I think an overused strength can be a weakness. I think a weakness in one context is a strength in another. But the point is, just sit and think about it. Think about what works for you, right? I know, for example, that if there's chaos going on, the worst thing I can do is concentrate on how I'm feeling about it.
Yeah.
The best thing I can do is concentrate on how other people are thinking about it and seeing what I can do to help them. It keeps me out of my own head. And when I stay in my own head, it's a scary place. Weird things happen. So I in a chaotic environment, I focus on what can I do to make that person feel a little more comfortable? What can I do to allay whatever fear that person is? And the only way you get to that is two things, really. The first one is knowing yourself a little. And the second is building relationships with people around you. The sort of relationships where you know their pet's name and you know what they like to do at the weekend, and you have a genuine interest in them as human beings. If you have that relationship, what lights their fire, what keeps them awake at night, and you can step in when you need to, and you can give them an opportunity to lead when they're in their comfort zone.
Yep.
So I think, if you can know yourself a little bit, if you can build some relationships, it's easier to stay calm in the chaos. It's never easy.
Yeah.
But it's easier. Yeah. And there is an element of fake it till you make it in there as well.
Yep.
Your people are often relying on you to go, hey, it's cool, we'll get through this. Even if on the inside you're going, uh-oh.
but I think it's also a case where you're not faking it, you just don't know. Like, an example there would be, you're trying to actually figure out what are your own principles here, your guiding principles, what are your own values looking like as you're going through those. Sometimes you don't actually quite realize what they are until you're in the moment and you're actually having to make a decision. And so I think you can, if you pause, like, what kind of leader do I want to be? What are the values I absolutely hold dear to me? What would that look like if I showed up? And then flip side, what's the complete opposite of that look like? And those sort of drawing up those boundaries for it. But you have to be in different situations to figure out that you only get clues in reflection on looking backwards as to the decisions, what just happened, what were the consequences. And so you will be experimenting in production, in live environment, right? To actually figure out what they look like. And that kind of brings me, I think, to the next key rule in the playbook that I would encourage is you need to listen more than you talk. Now, it only took me about 15 years to kind of figure that one out at this point. And perhaps if I'd shut up and listened more to the people who were trying to talk to me, I would have cottoned on. But the value of being able to ask great questions and to get others to talk and to listen actually is the best way to build trust. And if you're leading a team, right, let others talk. That is one of the go-to must-haves that I really wish I picked up earlier in life. What about you, Rob? Any last sort of thoughts you'd have on what's missing or what playbook rules you'd be throwing in there for brand new leaders?
Yeah, I would always encourage people, and this is anybody in business, but I would encourage them to give and seek feedback as much as possible. Yeah, whether that's a 5-minute water cooler conversation, although we don't have those anymore because we're all working remote now, right? Sorry, that's me getting cynical again. No, I would encourage people, whether it's a little water cooler conversation or whether it's a full-on 1-hour coaching and feedback session, give and seek feedback as much as you can. Yeah. Because as you said, an awful lot of the time we're going into new stuff blind. We don't know what to expect. If you have an opportunity to get some feedback from somebody who's been there already and knows what you could have done better or what you nailed, get it at every opportunity. That should be what you live on when you're in business.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect cue to wrap up on here, Rob. For corporate therapy, we've talked about leadership in 2024, your first gig. It's really not about having it all figured out. It's about asking the right questions, growing with your team, and being okay and uncomfortable in the comfortable or comfortable in the uncomfortable with chaos. Rob, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just get comfortable with the deep end. You're going to be there for a bit, but remember that you're learning, and that's important. Some days you win, some days you learn.
Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe, share, and join us for more episodes where we get to talk about the messy stuff that's happening in business. Keep it real and see you next week.
Stay classy, San Diego.